Usual, we start. Hello everyone, and welcome to the lecture on heat maps. As usual, we start by importing the libraries and modules we need. Import NumPy, Pandas, Seaborn, and Matplotlib's pyplot. And we have the special function to help us visualize our graph in Jupyter Notebook. Heat maps are a colorful map, and they consist of a lot of rectangular matrices. To look at those, let's create some data. We'll use NumPy's rand method to create a normally distributed sample. And we'll store our data in a variable called normal. So we'll call NumPy's random.rand method, and let's create a 12 by 15 array. And what we'll do is we'll call the heat map method that Seaborn has. So sns.heatmap, and we'll simply pass our normal data that we created and run it. So here we have a heat map. Okay, so we have a bunch of rectangular matrices, and it's very colorful. So the darker the color, the higher the value. Here on the side we have key. So the darker ones means higher value. And in our heat map here, the values range from 0 to 1. So the darker ones are higher. That means closer to 1. So the dark colors are closer to 1. Whereas the lighter colors are closer to 0. So this is the key to reading the heat map. And if we want to display the number for each of our cell, the number value that the cell holds, we can pass another parameter known as annote for annotation, and all we have to do is set that to true. Let's see an example. So we have sns.heatmap, and then we'll pass our normal data that we created, and then we pass the annotation argument, annote, and set it to true. If we run it now, we'll see that our heat map has now number values. Let me zoom in. So here you see, for instance, that this cell has a value of 0.94. The cell has 0.99. You see the darker ones, they have a value closer to 1, whereas the lighter colored cells have values close to 0. So 0.056 here, 0.03, and so on. So in this example, we see that the key ranges from 0 to 1. If we want, we can also change the value of this key. Let's say we want to show key between 0 and 2. For that, we'll have to pass two attributes known as the Vmax and Vminimum. Let's see how we can do that. So sns.heatmap, we have our normal data, and then let's pass the Vmin attribute and set it to 0, and let's pass the Vmax and set it to 1, or let's set it to 2. I think that will be more visible. So if we run it now, here you'll see that the key now ranges from 0 to 2 versus 0 to 1. And higher values here, values closer to 2, are darker in color, whereas values close to 0 are lighter in color. Since our data's value lies between 0 and 1, you'll see that the color will resemble up to here. So that's why it's lighter in appearance because we have set our keys maximum to be at 2. Whereas if we change this Vmax value to even a higher number, the graph will appear, our heat map will appear even lighter. Let me show you that. So if I change the Vmax to 3, it will appear even lighter. You see? Compare this to this. And similarly, if I change our Vmax to a lower number, let's say 0.5, and run it, it will be darker because here our key shows up to 0.5, but our data has values up to 1. That's why you see here most of the spots are darker. Okay, so that's a couple more attributes, V minimum and V maximum. Next, let's consider some data set that Seaborn has. It's called the flights dataset. Let's import it first. For that, we'll use Seaborn's load dataset method. So sns.load dataset, and then we'll be looking at the flights dataset. So let's save this in a variable called flights. I'm missing an H here. SNS that load dataset flights. Let's see what our dataset looks like. We'll call the head method and run it. So this flights dataset consists of data for flights. In year, we have year, months, and passengers. Okay, so for instance, this flight was in January 1949 and it had 112 passengers. And if we call the tail method, we'll see the last years for our flight dataset. Let me change this to tail, run it. So we have up to years 1960. Okay, that's what our dataset consists of. What we'll do is we'll pivot our flights dataset so that we can work and visualize it by using heat maps. Let's do that next. So flights.pivot, and let's pass these 3 columns, year, month, and passengers. So let's pass months, year, and passengers. And we'll save it in the same variable flights, in the same object. Now we should be able to see the months and year for our heat map. Those will be the X and Y axis, and passengers will be each of our cell for our heat map. So let's call the heat map method sns.heatmap, and we'll pass our flights dataset and run it. Great. Here we have year on the x-axis and months on the y-axis. We have our key here from 0 to 600. Again, the darker the color, the more the number of passengers, or the number of passengers is closer to 600. So we can say this is the darkest color in the heat map, and I'll say the number of passengers is close to 600 around here. Whereas this is the lightest part of the graph of the heat map, and the number of passengers is closer to the 200 level, right? Good. Again, let's pass the annotation or the annote attribute to see the number of passengers in each of our dataset, in each of our cell. Let's do that. So sns.heatmap, we have our flights dataset, and we'll set the annotation to be true and run it. Okay, here we have the data is presented in an exponent format, but we don't need that. We just need the number of passengers without the exponent. So for that, we'll need to pass another attribute, and this attribute is called the Fmt attribute, and this is used for string formatting. Okay, so when we add annotations, we can pass the Fmt attribute, and let's set it to D. So this will allow us to do some string formatting when we add annotations. Let's run it again. Okay, now it's much better, right? Now we can clearly see the number of passengers. So here you see 622, 606 passengers, so closer to 600, whereas the values here are closer to 200. Another thing we can do is we can add lines between each of our cells. For that, we can pass the line width attribute. Let's see how we can do that. So sns.heatmap, we have our flights data set, and we'll pass the line width attribute and set it to, let's say, 0.9. We'll adjust the number. We'll adjust once we see what it looks like. Let's run it. Okay. Now we have lines between each of our cells for our heat map. And let's add the annotation attribute too and set it to true, and fmt, run it again. Looks much better now, right? Now each cell is separate from the other. We can also pass the vminimum and vmaximum attributes to change this key values. So let's do that. Let me copy this, paste it down here, and let's add the vmin and vmax attributes. Let's change this from, let's say, what's the lowest value here? Around close to 100, right? So between 100, and let's set the vmax to be equal to 650. I think the highest value is closer to 650. Okay, 622. Yeah, 650 should be good. Let's run it again. Okay, see, now we have changed the limit of our key from what it was before to 100 to 650, and the color changed a little bit. So you can adjust this to different values to see the difference in appearance of the shade of our heat map. Great.